If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is.
Sources tell CBS News that both Israel and Hamas have agreed in principle to a ceasefire and hostage deals.
You have 5 days left to the deep state, to all the rest. You have only 5 days before President Trump's triumphant return here to Washington, D.C., and his nominees are already marching up and down Capitol Hill. And in fact, the Trump effect is already getting into place because I think people know by this point, but if you haven't heard yet, that just about 2 hours ago, news came down of a ceasefire deal that has been brokered essentially by President Trump's representative to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff, by the way, the same individual who was golfing with President Trump, one of his just close personal best friends. He was golfing with President Trump the day that Ryan Wesley Routh was there on the golf course at Trump International down in West Palm Beach. So someone who presumably would have faced an extreme situation with President Trump had that not been uncovered. We've got Darren Beatty here from Revolver News to talk us through this because, Darren, you and I were talking about the role of the America First movement in foreign policy. And I suppose my question to you is that what we're already starting to see?
Absolutely. And we're starting to see it across a variety of domains. We're seeing it not only in the Middle East, we're seeing it hopefully in Ukraine. I noticed that in Rubio's nomination hearing, he basically reiterated Trump's position that, yes, we need to bring an end to this conflict as well. And so we're seeing in multiple theaters a very strong prognosis for peace and stability. And Trump hasn't even been inaugurated yet. So I think it's pretty exceptional that we're seeing this level of progress before day one. We're in day -5, and we're already seeing a lot done. So it's pretty tremendous.
And it really is tremendous. And when we're looking at the broad swath of this, I think that there was an interesting take, and I'd love to get your sense on this, that apparently there's been a lot of chatter about the fact that Netanyahu was even saying that he wasn't a huge fan of this deal, that he wanted to be able to go further into Gaza, potentially take down all of northern Gaza. And, there was sort of this back and forth about how they wouldn't have the meeting at first, but apparently Witkoff was able to get him to come in. And so we had heard that Hamas had signed originally, and there was some back and forth on the Netanyahu side. Trump and Netanyahu have had an interesting relationship, to say the least, over the last couple of years. Right. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I think we'll have to see. I think the early signs are very positive, but I think there's a real architecture in place now in multiple theaters of the world. And so we're seeing very positive signs already. But again, it's a lot of the resolutions are premature. So we'll just have to see how it develops.
Well, I think that's right. And of course, we know with these ceasefires, it also portends that, of course, both sides are going to have to abide by that. And certainly something that
right.
Has
They're
been an issue with various
Yeah.
ceasefires, in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to have the right types of conditions, and there has to be some kind of reasonable expectation those conditions will be met. And, a lot of it will be contingent on just how much of the work has been done in terms of neutralizing a lot of the radical element in that region. Israel has had a long time to do it, but it's unclear to me whether the full job has been done. And it seems just as a practical matter, that would need to be completed to some kind of threshold degree before there can be any expectation of Hamas or whatever the future version is called, not disrupting the terms of any kind of peace agreement.
And that's exactly right. And so, of course, this is something that President Trump was calling for from the campaign trail, calling for from the front. What do you make, by the way, speaking of this, you mentioned Marco Rubio, since we're talking foreign policy and we're talking issues of war, that Marco Rubio seems to have changed his tone quite a bit when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. This was a guy who early on was very strongly involved in not only calling for a enlargement of NATO, pushing in, but he was one of the guys who would go over there with John McCain, with Lindsey Graham, with Amy Klobuchar, so many others, meeting with Poroshenko, meeting with who was the original president before Zelensky came in. I mean, this was a guy who has really gone on quite a journey when it comes to politics.
Indeed, I think it's yet again another major testament to Trump's leadership that within the rubric of Trump's leadership, I think Rubio can and will be an extremely effective Secretary of State when aligned with this agenda. And I think we see every indication that that's going to be the case. Certainly, the Ukraine-Russia issue is a critical litmus test for this because it's certainly one of those arenas in which U.S. involvement is highly questionable, at least in the way that it's been under the Biden regime of simply throwing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars into this war machine that simply contributes to the needless, unnecessary deaths of both sides, to the enrichment of what? To the betterment of what? Well, to the betterment of defense contractors and to the betterment of corrupt oligarchs in both Ukraine and Russia. And this is, inconceivable from an America First standpoint. And I think the guidestone is always the principle that I've advocated here on your show multiple times, and I haven't found any way to improve upon it, which simply is to say the victories of the American empire, the victories of the American system writ large, must also be the victories of the American people. We can't have a foreign policy simply based on the enrichment of the defense industry. We can't have an economy that simply exists for the enrichment of Wall Street and, various special interests. And we can't have an immigration and crime policy that's simply for the benefit of foreigners and criminals. The victories of the American empire have to be the victories of the American people. And I think that really is the crux. That is the core and the essence and the guiding principle of what America First really is.